Hi, everyone. We're just going to make sure most of the people are admitted before we start. This is great. I'm seeing lots of familiar faces here. I'll get started now, just in my introductions. Hi, I'm Margaret Moulton. I'm the Executive Director at Berkshire Grown. We have a lot of people signed up to hear about the cookbook tonight. That's great. We are all very grateful to Rob and Elisa for writing the cookbook, and to the panelists who are here tonight, Maddie Elling from Hosta Hill, Missy Leab from Ioaka Valley Farm, Brian Alberg from Greylock Works Break Room, and Darra Golstein, who is our host. I want to tell you just a few words about Berkshire Grown. We're hosting this tonight. We have been working to support farmers and local food for over 20 years. We do that in a number of ways. We, during the winter, have 8 winter farmers markets, 2 in Williamstown and 6 in Great Barrington. We publish a 24-page color guide, the Guide to Local Food and Farms, that you can also find on our website, that directs you directly to farmers markets, to farms, to restaurants. This year we're adding 2 new pages. We're adding a page about farm stands and farm stores, and a page for food access to local food pantries and community kitchens. We support farmers in a number of ways through education. We have workshops, we have mentorships, we do technical assistance, we help with grant writing, lots of different things. And this year we introduced a podcast during the summer so that they could listen while they're working in the fields. We're also really quite well known for our food access work. We've been doing Share the Bounty since 2012, where Berkshire Grown buys CSA farm shares, and the farmers deliver that fresh, locally grown food during the season directly to food pantries and community kitchens. As a result of the pandemic last spring and summer, we dove even more deeply into food access work, and we're now starting a program called Farm to Food Access, where we're working with farmers and food pantries to create a bridge where they're ordering directly and setting up long-term buying relationships. We're really excited that this cookbook is here. It's a labor of love that started with Rob and Elisa's son as an intern at Berkshire Grown, if I get that correctly. It was before my time, but that connection, I think, helped inspire them to explore all the farms and connect with other chefs like Brian in the area. So it's with great pleasure that I hand over the program tonight to the authors, the panelists, and to Darra Golstein. It's a privilege to have Darra managing this conversation tonight. She's the Professor Emerita of Russian at Williams College. She's the founding editor of the journal Gastronomica, and the author of 6 award-winning cookbooks on her own, including the recently published Beyond the North Wind, Russia in Recipes and in Lore, which was named one of the 10 best cookbooks in 2020 by Forbes, Esquire, and the Washington Post. Darra also sits on the board of the Julia Child Foundation of Gastronomy and the Culinary Arts, and she's a member of the Advisory Kitchen Cabinet of the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. So I will hand this to her after one more thing, which is Zoom etiquette. If everybody could please keep yourselves muted, only the people on the panel or Darra herself will be talking tonight. If you have questions, at the end, we'll try and take them. If we have time, just please put them in the chat room and I'll keep an eye on it and try and translate those questions back to Darra. I guess that's all. Have fun.
Thank you, Margaret. So I'm really pleased to be part of this panel tonight. Way back in the early 1980s, before Berkshire Grown even existed, I was part of a working group to think about ways that local produce could be gotten to the market, and so that people in the Berkshires region could eat more locally. And it has been rather a slow process. It was jump-started by the formation of Berkshire Grown, and it's continuing to grow now. And there are some really wonderful people involved in farming and processing and cooking and writing about all these local foods. And we've got several of them here tonight. So I'm going to introduce the panelists first, and then Rob and Elisa Bildner, who wrote the Berkshires Farm Table Cookbook, will be showing a very brief film, and then I'm going to open it up to the panelists so that they can answer a question that has to do with what it is like working with food in this region. So we'll start with Rob and Elisa as the authors of the cookbook. It's interesting that both of them are former lawyers and reading their bios that it was former lawyers and not continuing to be, but they've lived in the Berkshires for 35 years. Elisa has also been a journalist and a CEO of a company that worked with perishable foods. Rob has also a deep interest in sustainable farming, and he has started a number of companies that have to do with food manufacturing. I should mention that Elisa is also a professionally trained chef, and that Rob took the beautiful photographs in the Berkshire Farm Table Cookbook. So that brings us to Brian Alberg, whom I have known for many years when he was back at the Red Lion Inn. Now I feel very privileged that he's in North County. We don't always get the bounty of chefs this far north, but he's at the wonderful break room at Greylock Works, and I urge all of you to go there. It's a very safe environment, and he's doing extraordinary farm-to-table dinners there on the weekends, but you can go in during the day and taste his cooking as well, and some beautiful pastries. Brian is a graduate of the CIA, that being the Culinary Institute of America, not that other organization. And he worked for many years as head of the Main Street Hospitality Group, but he's really focusing his efforts on the break room right now. He has cooked at the James Beard Foundation and also been quite active in Outstanding in the Field, which is an organization that sponsors beautiful dinners outside that connect with farms. So next we have, I'm going to skip the little thumbnails and go to Missy Leab, because she really does work from the ground up as a farmer at Ioaka Valley Farm in Hancock, Massachusetts, a farm that I have to say I'm thrilled has managed to reinvent itself. When we first moved to the Berkshires in the early 80s, it was still a dairy farm, and dairy was not so profitable here any longer. And they worked really hard to diversify the farm and have done it so successfully. And it's always a joy to drive past and see it thriving. So they're growing Christmas trees. They're still raising very good natural beef. They're growing strawberries, pumpkins, and producing maple syrup. And they also have a cafe and a store on site. The cafe works during the sugaring season. So is it open now, Missy? For people or not this year?
Yes, we were able to open with the guidelines, and we are open Saturdays and Sundays for the cafe and even sugar house tours in a modified.
Great. So I urge all of you to visit. And then Maddie Elling is a Berkshire native who produces some of my favorite fermented foods. under the label of Hosta Hill. All of this food is produced in Pittsfield, so it really is very local. She founded the company in 2011 with her partner, Abe Hunrick, is that how you pronounce it? And it's really extraordinary what they do. They take 60,000 pounds of local produce, if you can imagine that. And it's all raw, and they ferment it to make beautiful kimchis and tonics and sauerkraut and a whole range of foods. You used to make an amazing tempeh. That was the only tempeh I ever liked, and now you no longer make it. But all of the other things are really good. So she is very keen on keeping the local produce local and being able to provide an outlet for the farmers. So what we're going to do now is turn it over to Rob and Elisa, who are going to show a very brief film about their book, and then we'll open it up to the panel discussion proper. So why don't you two take it over from here?
Okay, thank you so much, Darra, and also thank you, Berkshire Grown, and our esteemed fellow panelists whom we respect and really just enjoy talking food and farms with. So we'd like to introduce you to some of the farmers and chefs we interviewed for the Berkshires Farm Table Cookbook by showing the short video that gives you a scope of the project. We're honored that recently our book was named New England Cookbook of the Year by The Readable Feast, which is a panel of food folks in Boston. And we also want to note that our moderator, Darra, also received an award for Book of the Year for her newest cookbook, Beyond the North. And then finally, kudos to our collaborator and fellow panelist, Chef Brian Alberg, who created most of the recipes in our book. So bear with me as I share a screen to show you a brief video. And we will get that going. And there we go.
In our new book, the Berkshires Farm Table Cookbook, you'll meet some of the remarkable farmers and chefs who play a heroic role in preserving the agricultural community of the area. That is, the Berkshire Hills of Western Massachusetts and neighboring New York, Vermont, and Connecticut. We tell the stories of 42 of them with personal profiles, striking photographs, and 125 kitchen-tested recipes highlighting fresh ingredients, all inspired by or created by these farmers and chefs. The story this book tells, and the recipes, offer a picture of small family farms that go well beyond this region. This area is a special place, attracting visitors from across the country. It's known for its homegrown food and farm-to-table tradition, as well as its world-class scenery and culture. The mission of our book, the Berkshires Farm Table Cookbook, is to highlight the people, places, and things that make this region so special, and the story of small family farms. The dedicated farmers and farm-to-table chefs we write about are committed to producing food that is tastier and healthier than what's often found in the supermarket by maintaining healthy soil and farming and producing food sustainably. And, as importantly, the meat farmers we interviewed are consistently concerned with treating their animals humanely.
It's tough to do this work. The farmers we interviewed are motivated to farm for environmental, social, political, health, lifestyle, and even spiritual reasons, often sacrificing a comfortable living for their values. Who could foresee when we began our journey 4 years ago to write the Berkshires Farm Table Cookbook that its mission to inspire consumers to buy local would be more important than ever when it came out in May 2020. During this time and beyond, we need to support these hardworking and principled people. Our book, website, and Facebook page suggest ways you can buy their products even now. I'm Rob Bildner.
And I'm Elisa Spungeon Bildner.
Our new cookbook, the Berkshires Farm Table Cookbook, sheds light on the farmers and the farms of the Berkshires of Western Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York. Thanks so much. Oops.
Great, thank you.
Welcome.
I love seeing the Berkshire Hills and the vistas and also so many familiar faces among the farmers. It's really a pleasure. And to see such green, you know, it's sort of shocking to the eye after this long winter.
Absolutely.
We'll get there.
We will, we're on our way. So now I would like to open it up to a discussion among the panelists. And each of you will have a chance to answer this question that I think is really relevant from every perspective that you're coming to food from, whether it has to do with growing or raising or processing or cooking or writing about it. So we're all here in this very special region of the world. And I imagine that most of the listeners tonight are aware of the wonderful bounty of the Berkshires in the summertime, but maybe less aware of what goes on in the winter. Margaret mentioned that there are some farmers markets that run throughout the winter in Great Barrington and a couple in Williamstown. There's also the Bennington market, which runs weekly, but it's still not the same as this sense of cornucopia. So I would like to know from what you do. First of all, describe briefly to the audience what it is that you do and what we can do, what you do and what we can do to promote sustainable farming in the region. I'm also really curious to hear your thoughts on what you are doing, and again, what we as a community can do. When, and not in a pandemic year, this has been rather unusual, but what can we do to support these farms year round? It's quite easy in the summertime, I would say, but what can we do during the long winter season that we're just coming off of? So I'm going to start with Missy, since you're the one who really has your hands most immediately in the dirt. And why don't you take it away?
Well, thank you very much for having us here tonight. Missy from Ioaka Valley Farm over here in Hancock. And I guess it's appropriate to start here because we are in the midst of one of the first agricultural crops to be made right here in the Berkshires, and that of course is maple syrup. And we are pretty fortunate here at Ioaka that besides the maple products, we also, those products are available year round, unlike some of the other bounty of our county. And so we can utilize the syrup not only as a sweetener and an enjoyable part of a breakfast, but we make lots of specialty products. We try to share recipes, as a cookbook is also done for all of us, and ways to use maple syrup as a sweetener in your day-to-day use with the meats and all of that. Here at Ioaka, being a farmer, a lot of farmers tend to be pretty self-reliant. They tend to have their own gardens and their own resources. Being able to be a little self-sufficient. And over the years, especially my mother-in-law has always canned and preserved the summer bounty to get us through the winter. So her cellar is full of the jams, the corn, and a freezer full of especially all the wonderful blueberries and strawberries and raspberries this county can grow all summer long. So for all of us to try to utilize all the bounty during the summer and find ways to preserve and can and freeze it to enjoy all year long. But more than that, in this pandemic, as we rely on restaurants and other outlets to sell our products and use our products, that every step we take from our shopping to our dining can become more and more important. Examples are choosing the restaurants that are buying from local. And when you sit down at that restaurant, ask them what they're actually serving from the local farmers and ordering those entrees. When you go to the grocery store, even the regular grocery stores, look for the local sections. And if you can't find truly local, find as close to footprint as close to our area as possible. And Berkshire County has lots of local meats, dairy, between the yogurts and ice creams. Of course, ice cream is a favorite of mine anyways. And working with the year-round products and being aware of what's really in season from our local farmers and eating in season. That's a hard, very hard pattern to change, because we've had the luxury of being able to have strawberries in the grocery store all year long. So I think every little step we can take to look where we dine out, and when the bounty is full, learn just one new trick on how to preserve something and save it for the winter, even if it's just a small batch of jam or one batch of sweet corn that you can and freeze. All of that makes a big difference, because the more you support the farmers during the summer season, they can prepare themselves to be able to have the resources to replant for the next year. Farmers are used to living seasonally too, so we know that there's certain months that we're not going to see the same input in business as we do during other months. So I think farmers are and how to business plan and prepare for the quieter times. I guess that's a few points.
Have you ever thought of starting your own line of jams or preserves, or
We do.
are you busy enough that you don't really have time for that?
Well, we do a little bit here. We have what we call Judy's jams, and seasonally what we have is what she does prepare for the shelf. So we're pretty diversified in the specialty products that are sold here at the farm stand.
Okay, thank you. So talking about processing and preserving things, let's move on to Maddie from Hosta Hill.
And yeah, thank you again for having me. I'm so happy to be here. Some lovely people here. Yeah, so ways to eat year round and extend the season. Some secret weapons in my kitchen that I've really been appreciating and that are super simple and accessible to do have been having roasted red peppers frozen in my freezer and blanched corn cut off the cob and in bags and again frozen, and I'm just throwing those in everything. So have been so happy to have those to pull out after a long day, a long winter day, and to jazz up any sort of meal. And yeah, shopping at the farmers markets in the summer, stocking up on corn when it's in season, doing a big process, getting it in your freezer, not to mention the fermenting and canning, various ways to preserve vegetables and fruits. Fermentation is also very accessible, and you don't need a lot. You need a knife and a cutting board and some salt and vegetables and spices and a jar, and you're good to go. So yeah, that's what we love to do at Hosta Hill. We do a lot of processing of all sorts of vegetables, mainly cabbage and roots, and make all sorts of krauts. And the other question Darra had posed was, what are the challenges in the Berkshires here, and do we see any particular opportunities for farming and local foods to flourish in our region? For me, what I've seen having running Hosta Hill for the past 9 years, I think is infrastructure and needing more processing space for whether it's vegetables or slaughterhouses too. I know with the meat farmers, and I think it's gotten more challenging with the pandemic. And Missy, I don't know if you could speak to this better than me. I think it's hard to find places at a slaughterhouse to get your animals processed, and farmers could be growing larger crops of red cabbage, and it could be getting sliced and going to a cafeteria at a school or an institution. And that's what I'm actually really excited about this year. We have some big processing equipment. We have slicers and dicers, and I'm hoping to collaborate with some farmers to be able to suck up more produce and process it and be able to give it to various cafeterias and institutions. So we can get those places using more local foods. Because why do they need to be buying in onions that are from California or cabbages from Florida when we can grow that all here? And the other part of infrastructure I think of is also cooler space, walk-in coolers, or root cellars, cold storage, basically. Farmers could, again, be growing larger crops of storage vegetables. And some farmers are starting to do this, like the Abode Farm. And I think Indian Line Farm is putting in some infrastructure for more storage and growing of winter greens. So I'm so excited for that. But yeah, if we had access to a large root cellar for farmers, they could be growing more storage crops, storing them. They could be sold at grocery stores or the winter markets. Chefs could be buying them. So I think there's a lot of potential and a lot of opportunity there. So, yeah.
Do you see that as something along the line of what they're doing in the Northeast Kingdom with cheese in Vermont, Jasper Hill, which has opened its aging cove to all different small cheesemakers? So do you envision it as something cooperative or more individual on each farm?
You know, I think it could go either way. I think right now, you know, being in a pandemic, I'm not going to say coming out of a pandemic, because we're not. Being in a pandemic, there's so much, like, everything is so ripe for change. And I think collaboration is like so key. And I think going to be the name of the game for people to work together and pool their resources. So, I mean, I would love to see some sort of cooperative facility, storage center, or it all, so, you know, a food hub. Yeah, so there's lots of great models, I think, to base it off. So I think it's a fun conversation to have, and I'm glad to have the platform to speak about it here tonight.
Good. Brian.
Yeah.
You take this produce from this beautiful Berkshire soil and you work magic with us. What do you do?
Well, I cook it seasonally, so yeah, it's all relative. But to answer your question about how to extend the season and how to support farmers, you know, when it's not green out, you know, I really agree with what Maddie was saying about, you know, put corn in your freezer. You know, like all of my restaurants at the end of the season buy, I don't know, 1,500 ears of corn from Howden Farm. And we shuck it, we freeze it. It gives us like 100 1-gallon bags, and we use it all winter long. You know, buy hard squashes. I'm still getting hard squashes once a week from Peace Valley Farm. You know, there's just, you kind of have to think about, you got to think about it early on before it's gone. And I think to, you know, help buy in August, September, October, and even November and process the items, it'll extend it through the winter for you to use.
So even individuals should be thinking ahead.
Absolutely. I mean, my mom used to have this really cool electric cooker, and she'd put it outside on the picnic table in August or September, and she would can, I don't know, 80 quarts of tomato sauce. And it was just like, I think that's probably where I started to think about it at such a young age, was just to see this process. And those were awesome days and awesome times. Like, I loved going outside and smelling tomato sauce, you know, so you can make it to where it's an experience for yourself or for your family. And, you know, and then you could share that stuff. If you're not going to go through 80 quarts, share it with your neighbor.
Mm-hmm. How much state support or federal support do you think there should be for creating the kind of infrastructure or helping small farms get equipment that they might need to become more productive?
Well, I think there's grants out there. There's certainly been, this conversation's not a new conversation. I mean, this conversation's been going on for at least the last decade. You know, I've been on talks with the Stanton brothers about meat processing plants. You know, it's just going to take the right mix of people talking to the right people in government that can help make this happen. And I think that there's a couple of people that are working on it now in South County that, you know, have some backers. So I think that, you know, the conversation's out there.
Mhm. Good. Well, Rob and Elisa, why don't you weigh in? Having spent 4 years traveling around the Berkshires, talking to all kinds of different people who are farming, who are processing, who are cooking. If you had to, you probably have a sound bite for PR purposes. But if you can tell us what that sound bite might be, but then go a little bit deeper than that. What do you see in the Berkshires? What do you see as the biggest challenges from your conversations? And what do you see as something, is there anything really distinctive about this region that differentiates it from others?
So Darra, thanks so much, and I want to thank all the panelists in Berkshire Grown for putting this together. Really, we're so appreciative. What I'd like to answer your questions, all of them, by with a little bit of the backstory about how we created our book, because we created our book, and by the way, we're really off on the 4 years. Brian is probably laughing. I think it's more like 5, 6, 7. You're saying, Brian, saying, what are we talking about?
2013.
I know, but the reason we did it was to encourage readers to buy local. And support local farmers year round, and to tell them how to do it. And that's why we did the book. So I'm going to start a little bit of that story. Rob will continue, but first I just want to tell a really short anecdote, because I think it again goes to your questions. Just last week, I was at the Cummington Creamery, where I just run in to grab a sandwich because Rob and I just finished skiing at Notchview. And then later at the day, I was at Guido's in Pittsfield, and I picked up the following. I picked up Mutsu apples. They were storage apples that were grown in the Pioneer Valley at the creamery, local greenhouse tomatoes at the creamery, lettuces from what you would call an urban farm, which I think is definitely on the list of how one can buy local as well, an urban farm close to you or whatever. And I picked up rutabagas from the abode. And here's the deal. I wasn't shopping for any of these items, but when I see local, I buy. And I think that's what we really need to do to support local farming year round. And the deal is, and I think, I can't remember, maybe which panelist mentioned it, I apologize, but it takes a little more work, I think it's Missy, to buy local. Includes reading the signs above the bins and the cases, reading the country of origin labeling to see what it is, and not just taking something off the shelf and throwing it in your cart. And yes, it may not be possible to buy 100% local in winter, but frankly, it's pretty tough to buy 100% local even year round. But you're certainly going to find local root vegetables like the rutabagas I mentioned, and later on I'm going to show some dishes that use a lot of these root vegetables. So I just, a personal note, I wasn't always this way about local. In fact, I was a totally obsessive certified organic shopper. It was organic first, irrespective of whether the producer was a large commercial farm in California. But I learned from our son Rafi, who's on this Zoom call, who was the inspiration behind our book, and it was mentioned earlier, that I should be seeking local and sustainable first. And yes, a lot of these products are USDA certified organic, but not all, and not all because but many of them are organic, but are not certified for many reasons, including cost. So back to the book's backstory, because again, I think it answers some of your questions. So Rafi is the youngest of our 4 kids, and he started gardening our Beckett, Massachusetts backyard during middle school, and then went into high school and spent a semester at the mountain school in Berkshire, Vermont, which teaches high school juniors how to farm. Came back to Beckett, and for 2 summers farmed October Mountain Farm, which is basically our backyard, which is an intensively cultivated half-acre, and he sold his great produce at farmers markets all over, Otis, Great Barrington, West Stockbridge. But through him and seeing his passion, we learned how hard it was and satisfying both to farm, and frankly, how really difficult it was. I mean, we have such admiration for farmers, but so difficult to make a living. And Rafi was in a situation where he didn't have to rent or buy land. And we met other farmers through Rafi and realized that despite being very full-time, part-time residents of the Berkshires for, I think it was mentioned earlier, 35 years, we didn't know any farmers, and we didn't know why we should prioritize supporting them when we shop for food. which, as we now know, and I think it's important to emphasize this, you know, and to mention this, for better taste, better nutrition. The product isn't schlepped across the country for days, protecting land from development, a more humane treatment of animals, we mentioned in our video, supporting the community and the local economy. Rob, do you want to continue?
Yeah, and so we thought that based on this experience, that if we produced a cookbook that had stories about what the Berkshire grows and raises, would offer a way to support local farmers who are often hidden from view, as Lisa mentioned, and they're people who bring us food they lovingly produce. So Lisa grabbed her MacBook Pro, I grabbed my digital recorder and camera, and we interviewed and photographed the farmers in their fields. So to give you a flavor for the cookbook and to help answer your questions, Darra, I'd like to tell you at least once, very briefly, a story about a farming couple that has succeeded in the Berkshires. And afterward, Elisa and Brian will discuss some of the recipes in the cookbook. And this story is about the Primers, John and Joy, of Wildstone Farm in Pownell, Vermont, which is a diversified, certified organic farm with a specialty in growing garlic. Now, first of all, you won't see the kind of garlic John and Joy raise both in quality and diversity in most large supermarkets. The last time we looked at their website, they listed 12 varieties. They have clearly identified a niche, and they also ship, which expands their sales area. They sell at farmers markets, and they have a CSA, which is one of the best ways to buy local for at least half a year or more. And I noticed there was a question in the chat about CSAs, and we're happy to talk about it in question and answer. John and Joy are fiercely committed to certified organic, but they also operate their farm as sustainably as possible. They use solar power, water drawn from a spring, and mainly they use hand tools. When we buy from John and Joy and our other local farmers, we're buying from people who care passionately about the land, soil health, and the community. And when they have to buy off-farm food, they in turn only buy local from, for example, Cricket Creek in Williamstown or High Lawn Farm in Lee. And a footnote here, Darra, in the introduction mentioned that in my previous life, I was CEO of a globally sourced produce distribution company. We purchased garlic too, but it was from California, Mexico, South America, and Asia. Just think about the energy we consume shipping, flying, and trucking garlic all over the world, and then reshipping it to supermarkets up and down the East Coast. Elisa just wrote a story with my photographs for the Berkshire's Jewish Voice, and it's online as we speak, on how farmers and farm-to-table chefs in the Berkshires have fared during the pandemic. Many farmers have seen an uptick in their business, and they've responded by upping their CSA shares, opening farm stores, and offering extensive curbside pickup with some innovations here to stay, making it easier to buy local. Elisa spoke to John Primer, for example, who told her they landed a grant to purchase software for online CSA ordering, which they will continue to use. And I urge you to read this story. But I think there's one quote that's really important to repeat here. One of the farmers we interviewed is Dominic Palumbo of Moon in the Pond Farm of Sheffield. And he urges consumers to keep supporting him and other local farmers. Quote, if that groovy local farm is going to be there the next time things get tough, close quote, whether tough means a pandemic or unfeasible to transport products cross country because of climate change. And I'll just mention, if you want to learn more about certainly our stories and the recipes, our book is available at the Book Loft in Great Barrington, the bookstore in Lenox, Shaker Mill Books in West Stockbridge, and the Williams College Bookstore. And more information and recipes can be found at our website, berkshiresandbeyond.com.
I would just add very briefly that one of the reasons we wanted to go through the reasons to buy local is I think if people really felt in their souls and their hearts why they should be buying local, they will make the effort year-round to do so as best as they can, and think twice about buying, the strawberries from California that have just been shipped in. I just think it's really important to have that mindset as you approach food buying, and you will then expand your ways that you are willing to get food.
Well, why don't you show us some of the things that can be
recipes.
made with local produce in March, which is historically the most
go.
difficult
Okay.
time of year.
I'm just going to switch to another screen. Hold on one second. Okay, 1 second. Okay,
And I think
let's see.
Brian's gonna.
Brian, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, I know it's a little unfair because you're just sort of seeing it, we're not in the same room. But I'm just going to point out, and Brian and I are going to go back and forth and just talk a little bit about each of these items, maybe give a tip or two or whatever. I think what I might start with, I'm going to start with the Rutabaga Latkes, which are here, or pancakes. It's a little hard to see, so I'm going to have to pick them up. Brian, you're quite familiar with them, I know. I also have beet goat cheese pancakes or latkes here, and then fresh applesauce, which I highly recommend to go with them. And I would just start out by saying just really, really briefly that, and then Brian, please jump in. So often we go to well, let me just back up. Our philosophy in doing this book, and I hopefully want Brian to speak about this, is to really be, to have simple recipes. And I don't mean simple in a bad way. I mean simple in a good way. And Florence Fabricant, who wrote about the book, used the word simple in a very, very praiseworthy way. The idea is, and I learned this from Brian, that the ingredient is going to make the recipe, not 50 steps and 50 other ingredients. And I'll tell you a story in a moment, or after Brian speaks, about one little interchange we had on this. But so often we go to grocery stores and we pass right by like the rutabagas in winter, or beets maybe less so. But the idea is that we have to be a little more expansive and be open to using these kind of vegetables, root vegetables, which frankly I don't think are given their due. Brian, you want to jump in?
Yeah, they're not given their due. But even instead of the rutabaga or the beet, you could use parsnip or carrot. I mean, it's so flexible. And I don't cook with recipes. I cook with love and like thoughtfulness, and just and I make it fun. So I might use a recipe like as an idea, but then
Right.
the sky's the limit. That's why I don't bake, because baking is exact, and there's nothing exact about.
Okay. Brian, I know I love you. I don't bake either, although I'm going to show something a recipe from you that I did bake for precisely the same reason. Because if it says 3/4 of something, that doesn't mean 3/4 to me. Like, what is
I probably had to make that apple cake 20 times.
Now, this is carrot. This is carrot cake.
Maybe
Or whatever.
So just one note on the latkes. Just one tip I just want to mention. To make them foolproof, you have to take out every single bit of moisture in them, and you'll have great latkes. I've seen so many times people make latkes and they're all juicy and gooey, and you put them on the pan, forget it. You're going to have a juicy gooey mess. Brian, any tips on that you want to mention?
You nailed it.
Okay, I nailed that. I learned from you. Applesauce, I mentioned applesauce. There's absolutely no reason to buy applesauce. It is so simple to make applesauce. And apropos the issue of saving fruit, these are from local apples. This is from local apples. I keep my apples for months. And if you stick them in the refrigerator, take out all the bruised ones, wrap them up, which I'm too lazy to do most of the time, wrap them up in like paper or something, they will keep, and they'll keep for months, which is how I probably ended up getting mootses at the creamery. Okay, we're talking about this cake that that this would be not my first choice to make either, Brian, because I hate baking, but it's really good. And it's carrot bread, can be made with parsnips, and it's one of a number of quick breads that are in the book. And quick breads, again, it's no extended rising, etc. I hope you don't mind this, Brian. Don't be insulted. I took the recipe, and I make it a little bit differently. I use, it calls for all-purpose flour. I use white whole wheat flour, which you can make a 1-for-1 correspondence, particularly in quick breads, because it's not going to, it'll still rise, it'll be fine, but it gets a little more fiber, a little healthier. So that's my addition to this. How about you, Brian?
Recipes are guidelines. I mean,
Yeah.
I totally see that change.
Okay. As long as I have your blessing, I feel
So
good.
while you're talking recipes, there's a question in the chat about getting the moisture
I
out.
saw that. I was just going to reply and say squeeze.
Yeah, I put it in a towel, a dish towel.
Yeah.
Actually, usually I hand the dish towel to my husband, whose hands are stronger than mine, and he just squeezes and squeezes over the sink. Is that what you do?
I squeeze it. I just take it in paper towels and just squish it to death, because it really matters. I also mention, and I'm a lazy cook, Brian, I'm sure it's definitely not lazy. I may do things as easy as possible. So for years I would only do potato pancakes and these kind of root vegetable pancakes with hand grater. Are you kidding me? I only use a Cuisinart or a food processor. I'm too lazy, but it makes a lot of moisture. Anything else you want to add on those? I was going to go to a soup we have, and this is a celery root soup. So celery root is one of those vegetables you pass by and you really don't want to buy it because it's super ugly. It's got like hairs coming out of it in case you don't deal with it. Really unpleasing. Sorry for those who grow it. But it makes the most incredible soup. And this is a recipe, and I apologize to Brian because he's got a great recipe as well. This is not his recipe happens to be a vegan one. It's got, it's really hard to see. It's got Granny Smith apples in it. And very honestly, there's a separate recipe for chive oil. If you want to make it really pretty, you can make beautiful designs with chive oil. But again, since I'm a lazy cook, you can make it without and it comes out just fine. But celery root is something to think about using. The only problem is it's not so easy to peel. This is how I peel it. Brian, jump in. Honestly, cut off one of the ends, cut off usually the non-root end, use it as like a base so it's stable, and then literally take a knife and peel it vertically down, and then take out every single bit of root that I can, because if you don't, your soup won't be a light color. It'll be like, dark if you get the roots in. Brian, you want to add about that?
Yeah, I mean, I usually cut off the knob end but I use a peeler.
You really?
I use a
I use the peeler
I
too.
use a Swiss peeler for it. Yeah.
Really? Okay. This is again my laziness. Are you kidding?
Celery root is celeriac, right?
It's celeriac.
Correct.
Yeah.
Just asking that
Yeah.
question.
It's the same thing. It's not celery. Yeah, that's so interesting. Well, I'll try it, but I am so lazy that, and I know this is terrible to say, because when you peel it with a knife, you probably take off more of the inside.
Yeah.
Okay, I cry guilty as charged, but I peel it pretty quickly.
But you can eat the skin. So even if you do use a knife, you could julienne that and use that for something else.
Really?
Sure.
See? I never knew that.
I'll roast them whole and just serve them full roasted. It's like skin on.
That's great. Okay. New ideas here. There's a little last thing here. Again, dear, I want to be respectful of your time. The last thing,
one, and then we'll move on to some questions.
sure. I was going to show you apple bread. You talked about apple bread. Unfortunately, mine had freezer burn because it probably wasn't wrapped well enough in the freezer, so I don't want to bring it out. This is ganache, Brian's recipe for ganache, which is phenomenal. He makes it with and suggests using dried cranberries inside of it. I actually use when I'm making it often dried blueberries, because they're very small. You don't have to cut them, and again, I'm lazy. And the most important thing here that you should know, it's local dairy, and it makes all the difference. I use Highland dairy. Brian, I think you created the recipe inspired by Highland dairy, if I recall.
Yeah.
And there's a big difference between using heavy cream from Highland dairy, which is pasteurized and not ultra pasteurized, in terms of consistency and taste, and I can't recommend it enough. Brian?
It's a simple, straightforward recipe. I like the idea of using the blueberries instead of the cranberries.
It's yummy.
It's yummy. Cranberries were fine. You just have to cut them. And I said I'm lazy, so I don't.
Right. Yeah. So you just went with a smaller fruit.
I know. Anything to make it easier.
Okay, back to Darren.
Okay.
Well, I think that what we can take from this is that we need to be less wedded to recipes that we see in a book, and go to the store and see what's local and use that for the inspiration. Feel free to play with things and make discoveries. And it really is true about the deliciousness of a recipe comes from the raw ingredients that you're using. It comes from what you're starting with. And you don't have to make anything special or elaborate. Just bring out the best of these, particularly winter vegetables have so much sugar in them. So you roast them, you don't boil them. They caramelize and they turn out incredibly sweet. So use the local foods as an inspiration, and don't feel that you have to do something fancy, but just present it as this is what comes from this earth and this place where we live. So we have just a few minutes left, because I know that Margaret wants to say a few comments at the end. Are there any comments from the panelists that you want to add to what we've been talking about before we look at some of these questions?
No, I think it all comes down to you have to want to buy local, and everybody's right. It is more difficult, but the benefits are so much greater to buy local. You know, supporting fellow neighbors, eating better foods, keeping our region green. It's the right thing to do. You just have to be thoughtful about it.
Yeah. And as to the question about the CSAs, you can go to Berkshire Grown's website and you will find a list there, and you'll find all kinds of advice for how to join a CSA. When actually the Berkshires, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but really the first CSA in the country was in South County. So I mean, we're historic in that regard. And it's quite wonderful that they have continued to exist. In the early days, you got whatever the farmer gave you, and it wasn't always ideal, I think, from the consumer perspective, because maybe you don't, well, I love celery root, but maybe you don't like all the hair on celery root, and you would get a whole ton of it. Now just about every CSA lets you pick and choose so that you can curate your selection for the week. They usually have small ones and large ones, depending on family size. They have opportunities, many of them do, to support needy families in the region, so that some of your money can go towards that. And there are lots of different variables. So check them all out. Also grow your own too. That's another way to support the bounty of the Berkshires. And we have just a few minutes left. Rob and Elisa, do you have some parting thoughts before we turn over
Yes,
to...
thank you. Yes, thank you so much. And I really enjoyed the panel, this program, and the ideas are fabulous. And I would just say, this panel answers your second question, Darra. The Berkshires is distinctive. We have some extraordinary food producers here. We are a food hub. We just have to make it more visible, and all the folks on this panel are doing so in their own ways, whether, you know, processing, growing, creating, making food, getting the word out. So we're very optimistic and bullish about the Berkshires as, you know, a very, you know, promotable hub for small family farms, and are very encouraged by, I think, a lot of things we heard tonight are guidance for how we can even strengthen it. So thank you for raising such a profound question.
Yeah, I'd like to have my thank you again. And again, there's no reason the Berkshires can't, because it already is, you know, a food center, and it could be nationally known as that with more PR.
And we've spoken all over the country virtually, and we're getting the word out. That's why we call our site Berkshires and Beyond, because we have a message to bring to other regions of the country as well.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for all you're doing. Oh, here's a question for Maddie. Is it safe or admissible to ferment imperfect vegetables and fruits? After removing rotten or soft spots, will the salinity of the ferment generally be sufficient to prevent spoilage of the final product?
Yeah, good question. Short answer is yes, pretty much. It gets so acidic during the fermentation process that, you know, there's even been studies with like vegetables that have E. coli on them. E. coli doesn't even survive on there. And there's been really no cases of poisoning from fermented vegetables. It's, again, it's so acidic that it's a harsh environment. So yeah, you know, definitely remove those rotten, gross spots, but soft spots are totally fine. And yeah, it'll be great. So good luck.
What's the general salinity that you use for your kraut?
Yeah, we do about 2.5% salt. You could even do 2%. In my home kitchen, that's what I would do. Yeah, it's a good one.
Someone else wonders whether any of the abandoned mills in the county could be used as cold storage facilities.
I think the potential's there, definitely.
A great idea.
Yeah,
Great idea. I took a note on that one.
But the cost of renovating one of them to be able to be USDA compliant is huge.
Yeah, that's one of the big problems.
Yeah.
There are facilities in some other groups that we are working with, looking at how to build out some storage facilities, cold storage, walk-in freezers. There was a big grant that came out from the state this summer, and a few places in the county did get funding for cold storage and walk-in. So that may change, and I'm with you, Maddie. I think food hubs would be a great thing to work on in the Berkshires. And I think our farm to food access is sort of a step in that direction.
Yes, nice.
Thank you,
It looks
everybody.
like we are at just about 8:30 now. Margaret, did you have some parting words?
Just to say thank you to everybody. This was really great. It was really fun to hear from everyone. And thank you to all of you who signed up. Thank you to those of you who signed up as $100 members for Berkshire Grown. That's great. That's terrific. You got a book to go along with all the great newsletters and information you'll be getting in the future. A lot of questions that were set up in the chat or mentioned, you can find those answers on our website, which is berkshiregrown.org. We have our guide on the website. We also have a Shop Local Now page, which we set up during the pandemic to address people who really needed things right away that weren't necessarily in the guide. So there's lots of ways to find out information about sourcing locally, but it is really important. And I think you made a good comment, Elisa, when you said that it's not necessarily organic that's important, it's local and sustainable.
Yeah, our messaging is very simple. Buy local, know your farmer. And that's resonating.
And I think if people, again, this is all a PR issue, if people really knew when they were in the supermarket, not necessarily in the Berkshires, but farther out or whatever, really understood where their food was from, they would really think twice about their buying habits. So it's that kind of PR that I think we have to encourage.
Yeah.
I also think, people often say, oh, but local food is much more expensive. Local food reflects the real cost of growing healthy food.
Totally.
Not underwritten by large government, commodity farms and subsidies.
Yeah.
And it's what it costs for a farmer to make often a very bare bones living. So buying local literally supports your farmers.
I'm so glad you said this.
Supports our community.
That's right.
Yeah. Well,
Great.
anyway, again, we
It's fun.
thank you all so much for welcoming us and getting the message and supporting us, and for your leadership, and for our collaborator Brian. It's such a pleasure. And
Yes, head over to the break room.
I'm ready.
You should. I'm too. We're
And Maddie and Missy, whom we interviewed for the book, and bothered you all with some photos and some interviewing, but we hope that I know you appreciate
sports on
It's
this.
been great
Really.
sports. So we thank you all so much.
And we have both their products there too.
I know you do.
Right, absolutely.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
All right,
Take
bye.
care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Be well, everybody.
Thanks so much,
Happy
everybody.
spring. Spring is coming.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.